Hello and welcome to the second episode of the BioWar Devblog with me, the author. So today's episode is going to be about the setting. Now this is quite important, as I'm sure you will have realised, and in this I'm going to cover a fair bit of content along with the usual Q&A and a little snippet of timeline, and because frankly why not, I'm going to introduce things with a little quote. So to start with, the setting, I would like to give you a quote from one of the protagonists, William Rowe. By this point in the war, we'd been pushed all the way from Germany back to Paris. The Nazis had something new, something we weren't expecting. They discovered something in Egypt that they were splicing into their equipment, and whatever it was making their vehicles faster and stronger, their smallest guns scary, and their biggest guns nigh apocalyptic. So that gives you a little idea there. But on to some more general information. I don't want to read too much of the book just yet, especially considering a lot of it is unedited. So we shall start with the fact that for the setting today, I'm only going to be covering book 1. That's quite important because obviously the entire series isn't out yet. So it makes sense to start with book 1, and also because there are still some things in later on in the timeline that aren't final yet. So it makes sense to cover what is final first. My second point is that this book is set primarily in Europe. There are some notable exceptions to this, but generally speaking, the majority of book 1 takes place in Europe. And lastly, this particular book in the series covers the year 1947. Mostly. There is a single chapter in December of 1946, but you'll just have to wait and find out what that's about. So to begin with in terms of the timeline and the overall concept for the story, it is an alternate history where German forces are supplemented and replaced by hybrid creatures. And we are going to get onto this right now with the timeline. So to start the timeline off, I am giving no years or dates just yet, but Germany discovers something in Egypt, as Will said. This thing is known only as the hive mind, and the Germans decide to make a pact with it. And this pact involves the hive mind helping the Germans to win the Second World War, and it does this by splicing or merging creatures of its own creation with the technology that the Germans possess. In effect, German manpower now becomes... what's the word? Well, it becomes a non-factor. No, that's not right. German manpower becomes irrelevant. And the reason for this is obviously if creatures are controlling your vehicles, manning your weapons, operating your ships, you don't really need German troops to be doing that. So this allows the Germans to make great strides in their war effort, and in 1945 the hive mind finally unleashes the bioweapons. However, it doesn't just unleash these bioweapons upon the Allies, it also releases them and turns them on the Germans. And the war completely changes pace from this point on, because it is no longer simply a war of ideologies, a war of international politics, a war against nations. It's now become a war of survival or extinction. Now, past this point, the Allies begin to lose ground, and eventually, by 1946, or by the end of 1946 rather, they have been beaten all the way back to Paris and are forced to reorganise and rethink how they are fighting the war. Now, I'm going to leave the timeline there because anything further than that will actually begin to encroach on the story of Book 1, which is something I don't want to do just yet. So, now what we can do is this month's Q&A. So, these are questions that have been collected from various sources. So some will have been comments on the previous video. Some can be from the Discord server, which is still being made, by the way. I will cover that in a minute. And some questions from people that I know personally who have been keeping up to date with these books. So the first question was from a YouTube comment, and it asks, what other media is a good indicator that someone might like BioWar? Now, this kind of ties into another question that I'm going to answer later, but for now, what I will say is fans of things like Call of Duty Zombies, Warhammer, zombie army games, all things like that, generally that sci-fi fantasy with a military flair to it. I think that's generally the target audience. Naturally, I do try and write to cover as many bases as possible, but that, in terms of the original concept, they are kind of the target audience. And the second question is, what inspired you to write about bioweapons? Now, this was actually part of a double-barreled question on the YouTube comments of the last video, but I've kind of separated this one up because, well, it means I can provide two separate answers and properly engage with each part of the message. So, to begin with, this all started during a writing course, and we was given a prompt for horror writing. Now, that wasn't especially my interest at the time. My interest was more military fiction. However, I decided to try and merge both together, and the result was the very, very first draft of one of the chapters for BioWar. So, just to reiterate with the answer the question, it was essentially a horror writing prompt from a writing course that actually inspired me to create the concept for the bioweapons. Another question, this is the second part of the previous one. Did the imagery for these creatures come naturally? Yes. Yes, very much so. It's quite easy to create these bioweapons, actually. Partially, just looking at the natural world, there are lots of beautifully disgusting and hideous creatures out there that I can use for inspiration, and as it is the interest of some of my friends, I can rely on them to usually send me pictures of absolutely disgusting, horrible creatures that live somewhere at the bottom of the ocean, which I can then incorporate into the design for bioweapons. I'm going to put up some pictures of some of the bioweapons that I have created and some of the inspirations for them. So just a little warning here for, I suppose, a little bit of horror, just in case anybody's a little squeamish. But there we go. And last question. This one was asked to me by a friend, and it has a rather simple answer. Will we see or hear about more characters in these videos? Yes. Yes, you will indeed. They will be coming up in future videos. So this episode I have talked about the setting and the plot, and in future episodes I will be talking more about creatures, concepts and characters. So episode 1 does cover some of this and some of my plan for this series. So if you're interested and want to know more about what's coming, then feel free to look at that one. I will add that I also vocalised that episode a little better than this one. So next up we have progress. Obviously all important for actually having a book published. Now, it's a rather short progress report this month, partially because I'm actually recording this a little bit early, just whilst I have chance to, really. But the other part of the reasoning behind this is because I want to save some little bits for more of a dedicated announcement, shall we say. One of these, though, I am going to give a little preview of, possibly in the next episode. So, the progress report itself. The short story prequel Seas of Glory is now done and will be released soon once it has had an edit. BioWar Red Offensive is continuing. Chapters are being written and I'm making some good progress with that. However, obviously there isn't anything showable yet because these are still first drafts. On the subject of first drafts, book 1, as we've been discussing, BioWar, is in the editing stage at the moment. Now, there have been some paper copies distributed to certain people. I will add certain people who have specifically asked for them, who I know personally, and I believe some of those are going to be doing some editing work as well. So that may speed things up a little bit. So hopefully editing of book 1 will be moving along quickly enough soon that I will be able to start showing some bits. No promises just yet, but there may be something. And last but not least, we have what's next. Well, in the next episode, I will start to cover some of the protagonists. My overall plan is to start with a general overview of each of the characters, and then in future episodes, the first half of each video will be dedicated to a specific protagonist. And that is with the caveat that I'm not going to be revealing any spoilers for the main book. So you will have plenty of backstory on these characters if you choose to listen to them, ready for when the book comes out, but it won't be anything that spoils anything when the book actually comes out. And maybe, if you're lucky, I might also begin reading some excerpts as well. These will have to be excerpts that are edited, so they may be few and far between for now, but the possibility's there, so we'll see how things go. And that is about it for this episode. Again, I would like to apologise for the microphone quality. I still have no idea when that's going to be sorted, or when this situation's going to change. So for now, I do apologise and just try and put up with it, as I am. And that is about it, I believe. I've had to do a little bit of extra editing work because it has been a very busy few weeks and I am rather tired, so there will be quite a little bit of snippings where I've just completely lost my trail of thought and left big pauses. So all of that will have been edited by the time all of you lovely viewers hear this. So that is about that, I believe. So have a lovely day, viewers, and I will hopefully be back for another development log next month.